In the heart of the Galápagos Islands, nature hides one of its strangest and most unsettling secrets. At first glance, the vampire finch looks like an ordinary small bird, just another curious member of Darwin's famous finches. But appearances deceive. When food runs scarce and survival hangs by a thread, this bird reveals a shocking instinct. It drinks blood. The vampire finch has evolved to pierce the skin of larger seabirds, usually unsuspecting boobies, and sip their blood to survive. What seems like a scene from a horror film is, in reality, a finely tuned survival strategy. Instead of seeds or insects, the finch relies on a gruesome but effective resource, living plasma drawn straight from its neighbors. To the boobies, the experience is painful, yet often tolerated. The finches begin by pecking at their feathers, grooming parasites, and slowly working their way to exposed skin. Then, when the blood flows, they drink greedily, turning companionship into exploitation. In the harsh environment of the Galápagos, where droughts can erase other food sources, this adaptation is not madness. It is brilliance born of desperation. But what does this bizarre feeding behavior tell us about evolution? Why would a harmless seed eater transform into a blood drinker? And what does it reveal about the razor-thin line between cooperation and cruelty in nature? Today, we dive deep into the world of the vampire finch, a bird that challenges our very ideas of survival, adaptation, and the strange bargains life makes to endure. The Galápagos Islands are a place of legends, a chain of volcanic outcrops where life bends the rules of survival. Creatures here evolve in isolation, their instincts sharpened by scarcity, their behaviors pushed to the extremes. Among them is a bird so small and ordinary-looking that you might mistake it for just another finch. Yet beneath its harmless exterior lies one of evolution's strangest secrets. This is the vampire finch, a bird that drinks blood to stay alive. At first sight, nothing about this finch warns you of its dark habit. It hops lightly across the rocks, its feathers blending into the volcanic landscape, its size no larger than a sparrow. But when the dry season comes and the land offers no fruit, no seeds, no insects, the finch reveals its hidden survival strategy. It turns to the great seabirds that nest along the cliffs, the Nazca boobies and the blue-footed boobies, towering neighbors that carry within them the lifeblood of survival. The finch begins innocently, pecking at feathers, cleaning parasites, offering what seems like harmless grooming. The boobie tolerates the attention, perhaps even relieved of the itching. But slowly the pecks grow sharper, more insistent until droplets of blood break through the skin. Then, with quick precision, the finch drinks. It sips greedily, hopping from wound to wound, turning care into exploitation, turning trust into hunger satisfied. For the boobie, the experience is painful, yet often endured. The bond between host and parasite is strange. Why not fight back? Why not drive the finch away? Some scientists believe the boobies have grown accustomed to the grooming and fail to recognize when the balance tips. Others think the loss of a little blood is simply less costly than constant resistance. Whatever the reason, the finch continues. Its beak stained with red, its survival secured through a pact neither side fully understands. In the eyes of humans, this act looks like betrayal, a small songbird transformed into a predator of blood, a horror hidden in the feathers of innocence. But nature is not concerned with horror or beauty. It is concerned with survival. In the Galápagos, droughts can last for months, stripping the land of resources. The vampire finch's strategy may seem cruel, but it is also brilliant. Where others starve, it endures. Where seeds fail, blood flows. To watch this bird is to witness evolution at its most ruthless and creative. Here, love, trust, and cooperation blur into exploitation. A grooming ritual mutates into vampirism. A seed eater becomes a blood drinker. And in this transformation, we see the truth of life on the edges of survival. Adaptation takes any form it must, no matter how shocking to our eyes. The vampire finch did not start as a monster. Its ancestors, like other Darwin's finches, lived on a diet of seeds, fruits, and insects. They cracked shells with sturdy beaks. They probed bark for larvae. They lived as any small songbird might. But isolation changes everything. On the rocky islands of Wolfe and Darwin, food was never guaranteed. Droughts burned away vegetation. Insects vanished with the changing seasons. Seeds turned scarce. And in that emptiness, desperation carved out a new path. The seabirds were always there. Large colonies of Nazca and red-footed boobies returned year after year, nesting on the cliffs. To them, the finches were little more than neighbors, sometimes even partners, plucking parasites from their feathers. What began as a simple act of cleaning, a fair exchange of service for tolerance, slowly shifted. Each peck drew the finch closer to the lifeline, hidden under skin. And over time, some finches learned that the blood itself was a meal. Evolution, patient and merciless, rewarded this strange discovery. Those that drank blood survived the longest droughts. Those that refused vanished with the dry wind. In time, the habit became instinct. The instinct became identity. And the vampire finch was born, not from malice, but from necessity. When you watch them today hopping onto the backs of boobies with casual confidence, the scene feels surreal. A bird no bigger than a human hand, piercing the skin of one many times its size. The boobie flinches, it shifts, but it rarely resists. Instead, it stands, wings tucked, as the finch drinks deeply, its head dipping like a creature from some forgotten myth. The blood is rich in iron, protein, and water. Nutrients the finch cannot easily find on the barren rocks. Each sip buys survival. Each drop ensures that its fragile body endures one more day in a place where failure means extinction. In the logic of the islands, this is not cruelty. This is balance, written in red. And yet, the image unsettles us. Birds in our minds belong to the skies. They are symbols of freedom, beauty, and song. To see one drink blood is to see that image shattered. It forces us to accept that nature is not bound by our stories. It is bound only by survival, and survival knows no shame. The vampire finch is not alone in its strangeness. Across the islands, other finches have bent their beaks to fit niches no one expected. One crushes cactus flowers, another splits open seeds as hard as stone, another uses twigs like tools to pry out hidden insects. Each one is a thread in the larger story of Darwin's revelation. Evolution shaping life through trial, error, and endless adaptation. But only one became a vampire, and in doing so, it captured the world's imagination. The behavior of the vampire finch is so extraordinary that for a long time, many people doubted it was real. Early reports from sailors and naturalists described small birds feeding on the wounds of boobies, and the accounts sounded too strange to be true. Yet when scientists finally documented it, cameras rolling in the Galápagos sun, the world saw with its own eyes the strange ritual of blood-drinking birds. What seemed like legend became fact. The boobies themselves, oddly, seem resigned to the role of blood donors. Some shuffle their wings or tilt their heads as if annoyed, but few actively chase the finches away. The reasons for this tolerance remain debated. One theory suggests the finches began as groomers, and the boobies still accept them as such, not recognizing the line that has been crossed. Another proposes that fighting off the finches costs more energy than the blood that is lost, so the boobies simply endure. In either case, the relationship reflects a delicate balance. Too much harm, and the boobies might abandon the colony. Too little, and the finches would starve. Evolution has carved a narrow middle path where both survive, though uneasily, bound together by necessity rather than choice. To the human eye, the scene resembles something out of a nightmare. A small bird pecking open the flesh of its neighbor, wings trembling as it feeds. Yet, within this grim act lies a perfect example of adaptation. The vampire finch does not choose to be grotesque. It chooses to live. And in a land where survival is always on the edge of failure, that choice is everything. The Galapagos has always been a crucible of transformation. Charles Darwin himself marveled at the way birds on one set of islands looked so different from those just a few miles away. Beaks lengthened, shortened, widened, sharpened, each sculpted by the invisible hand of natural selection. For Darwin, these finches became a living map of evolution's work. He could not have known then that among their descendants would rise a blood drinker, a creature whose adaptation would be remembered not for beauty, but for shock. Yet, even this shocking behavior has lessons. It shows that survival never follows a single path. One bird cracks seeds, another sips nectar, another drinks blood. All are correct, all are successful. Because in the end, success in nature is not about fairness or morality. It is about what endures. The story of the vampire finch is not only about a bird. It is about an island shaped by fire and ocean, where survival has always demanded invention. The Galapagos are unforgiving. Rain falls unpredictably, and when the skies close, months of drought follow. Plants wither, insects vanish, and the ground turns barren. For a tiny finch, such times mean hunger, and hunger drives creativity. Some finches turn to cactus flowers, sipping nectar when no seeds could be found. Others learn to pry insects out of bark with twigs, using tools in ways that astonished scientists. And on Wolfe and Darwin Islands, one lineage discovered something more shocking. Where others saw neighbors, they saw opportunity. They learned to drink blood. The act itself is strange to watch. The finch hops close, bold and persistent, its head cocked as if reading the patience of its host. It begins with small pecks, often at the base of feathers where lice gather. The boobie tolerates this, expecting the familiar routine of parasite removal, but the finch continues, the peck sharpening, until red wells up against the white feathers. The bird leans in, and with quick, deliberate motions, it drinks. For the finch, the blood is life. It is water when the island is dry, protein when seeds are gone, iron when nothing else remains. Each drop carries the difference between death and survival. And so, the behavior, once rare, spread. Those who drank survived the droughts. Those who did not were lost. What fascinates scientists is not just the feeding itself, but the tolerance it receives. Why do boobies allow it? Perhaps they cannot tell the difference between parasite cleaning and blood pecking. Perhaps the loss of blood is too minor to matter. Or perhaps, in the strange arithmetic of nature, the cost of resistance is greater than the wound. Whatever the reason, the vampire finch thrives in this uneasy truce. To call it vampirism is poetic, but in truth, it is evolution at work. Nature writes no rules of morality. It writes rules of efficiency. If blood saves the finch from starvation, then blood becomes food. If tolerance spares the boobie from constant harassment, then tolerance becomes survival. It is not friendship. It is not cruelty. It is the quiet bargain of the Galapagos. And when you watch this bargain unfold, the tiny beak piercing skin, the host shifting but staying still, you feel both awe and unease. Awe at the inventiveness of life, unease at how thin the line is between cooperation and exploitation. The vampire finch blurs that line, living proof that survival can twist even trust into hunger's service. When researchers first studied these birds closely, they were struck not only by the act itself, but by the setting in which it occurs. Wolfe and Darwin Islands are isolated, small specks of volcanic rock surrounded by endless ocean. They offer almost nothing in times of drought. Seeds become scarce, cactus flowers wither, and insects hide away. Yet seabirds still nest there in great colonies, their bodies holding the very nutrients the finches need. In this emptiness, blood became the most reliable resource. The finches do not kill their hosts. They take just enough to endure, hopping from one bird to another, pecking, drinking, moving on. It is exploitation, but not annihilation. If the boobies abandoned the islands entirely, the finches would starve. So, balance is maintained in a strange, uneasy partnership. The host suffers, but survives. The parasite feeds, but does not destroy. It is a relationship born from scarcity, carved into habit by generations of drought. This kind of adaptation shocks us because it feels unnatural. We think of birds as harmless seed eaters or sweet singers, not as blood drinkers. But evolution knows no such boundaries. If survival demands blood, then blood becomes part of the menu. The vampire finch reminds us that nature is not what we expect. It is what works. The most chilling part of this story is how ordinary the bird looks. With brown feathers, a sharp little beak, and bright eyes, it could pass unnoticed among its cousins. Yet hidden in that beak is the power to cross the line between cooperation and predation. It is not size or strength that defines survival here. It is creativity, adaptation, the willingness to take what is needed no matter how strange it seems. To scientists, this bird is more than just a curiosity. It is a symbol of how quickly life can transform when pressured by the environment. A simple act, pecking parasites, twisted into something darker, and once it proved successful, it became a way of life. Within just a few generations, what was once rare became instinct. And that instinct tells us something profound. It tells us that survival is not about beauty or kindness. It is about persistence. It is about rewriting the rules when the old ones fail. It is about finding food where no one else dares to look. In that sense, the vampire finch is not a monster at all. It is a survivor. To truly understand the vampire finch, you must imagine the silence of its world. On the islands of Wolf and Darwin, there are no forests, no fields of grain, no hum of insects in summer air. There are cliffs, rocks baked in the sun, and the endless crash of ocean waves. Life here is stripped down to its harshest form. And in that silence, a small bird hops toward a giant neighbor, pecks gently at its feathers, and begins the ritual that has shocked generations of observers. The booby sits still, white feathers gleaming in the sun, its blue feet planted firmly on the ground. The finch moves with quick, deliberate steps, its beak darting, at first pulling away lice and ticks. The booby tolerates it. After all, parasites are irritating and the finch offers relief. But then the beak digs deeper, finding the thin skin beneath. A red bead forms, then another, and soon the finch bends low, its beak stained crimson. It is not a frenzy. It is careful, steady, almost methodical. The finch takes just enough to sustain itself, then hops away, its belly full, its throat slick with the taste of survival. To the booby, the wound is small, but to the finch, it is everything. One drop means another day endured. One sip means life continues in a place where most would fail. The scene plays out again and again across the colonies. Tiny birds lined up on the backs of giants, each taking their turn. To an outsider, it seems impossible that the boobies allow it. Yet they rarely resist. Some flinch, some shuffle their wings, but most remain still, eyes fixed on the horizon. Perhaps it is habit. Perhaps it is the price of peace. Whatever the reason, the finches thrive in the shadow of their hosts. For scientists, the questions are endless. How did the behavior first begin? Was it desperation in a single drought that sparked the first drops of blood to be taken? Or was it an accident, a grooming peck gone too deep that revealed a new resource? However it began, once the path was found, evolution took hold. Those who drank survived. Those who did not were left behind. It is unsettling to think of such change happening so quickly. Yet on islands, evolution often speeds forward. Isolation, scarcity, and pressure drive adaptation into strange shapes. The vampire finch is one of the most dramatic examples, but it is not alone. Across the Galápagos, creatures carry adaptations that seem like science fiction. Iguanas that dive into the sea, cormorants that lost the gift of flight, tortoises that grow massive on barren rock. In this crucible, survival demands invention. An invention often looks bizarre. And so the vampire finch is not an accident. It is the perfect solution to a brutal problem. It reminds us that even in the smallest bodies, nature can write the strangest stories. When you hear the phrase vampire bird, your imagination might conjure images of monstrous wings and glowing eyes. But the truth is more surprising. The vampire finch looks ordinary, even charming, with its small body and quick darting movements. If you saw it perched on a branch in your backyard, you would never suspect its hidden appetite. And that is part of what makes its story so haunting. The predator wears the mask of the harmless. Observers often describe the first time they witness blood feeding as surreal. A researcher may be taking notes, watching finches hop and chirp, when suddenly one climbs onto a boobie and begins pecking with unusual persistence. At first, it looks like grooming, but then the white feathers stain red, and the finch lowers its beak to drink. What began as an innocent scene of bird life turns into something out of a Gothic tale. The boobies, large and elegant, seem oddly passive in this exchange. Perhaps they are so used to the presence of finches that they no longer react strongly. Perhaps their tolerance is simply the path of least resistance. But the effect is the same. The finches feed freely, their survival ensured by the patience or indifference of their hosts. For scientists, this behavior raises deep questions about the thin line between cooperation and exploitation. Grooming is a service, a mutual exchange where both creatures benefit. Blood feeding is parasitism, a one-sided arrangement that harms the host. The vampire finch stands right at the edge of these categories, blurring them, challenging our definitions. To call it cruel would be to impose human morality on a system that knows none. To call it clever would be to forget that desperation drove it first. What it truly is, perhaps, is proof that life bends rules we thought were unbreakable. In a place where droughts can starve entire populations, survival itself rewrites the script. And as the finches hop along the cliffs of Wolf and Darwin, their tiny bodies silhouetted against the endless blue of the Pacific, they remind us of something profound. Survival is not always noble. It is not always beautiful, but it is always inventive. What makes the vampire finch even more fascinating is its place within the larger family of Darwin's finches. These birds, which inspired Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, are famous for their diversity of beaks. Some crack open seeds, others probe cactus flowers, still others use sticks to extract insects from wood. Each species found a niche, a way to survive in the patchwork environments of the Galápagos. And then one lineage went further, carving out a niche that no one could have imagined, feeding on blood. The finches on Wolf and Darwin Islands are not larger or more powerful than their cousins. Their beaks are sharp, but not extraordinary. Their bodies are small, their plumage plain. What sets them apart is not their appearance, but their behavior. Behavior that defies expectation. Behavior that evolved because in a land of scarcity, every resource becomes precious. Imagine a dry season stretching on for months. Seeds shrivel, insects hide, nectar vanishes. The finches search, probe, hop from rock to rock, but find nothing. Yet the boobies still stand in their colonies, breeding, preening, resting. Their bodies carry water and nutrients locked beneath the skin. For the finch, the leap from cleaning parasites to drawing blood was not just desperation, it was discovery. And once discovered, it became the difference between extinction and survival. Scientists call this process adaptation, the shift of a trait from one purpose to another. The pecking behavior, once aimed at parasites, shifted to blood. The host tolerated it, the droughts rewarded it, and over generations it became instinct. Now, the young finches learn by watching their elders, and the cycle continues. This transformation reveals the creative power of evolution. From the same ancestor that pecked seeds on a distant island came the blood drinker of Wolf and Darwin. The difference is not in the bones, but in the choices forced by the environment. It is a reminder that life is not fixed. It is fluid, always searching, always bending, always finding new ways to endure. And as unsettling as it is, the vampire finch shows us that adaptation does not care for our categories of normal or grotesque. To the bird, blood is simply food. To us, it is a shock. But the gap between those views is the space where nature thrives, unconcerned with human judgment. The vampire finch is a paradox dressed in feathers. It is small, almost fragile, and yet it has become one of the most notorious survivors of the Galápagos. Its fame does not come from beauty or song, but from the act of piercing flesh and drinking life itself. That image stays with you. A tiny bird, delicate in form, yet bold enough to climb onto a giant seabird and feed from its veins. For the boobies, the cost is not just blood. Sometimes their feathers are damaged where the finches peck, leaving raw patches of skin vulnerable to infection. Yet still, the tolerance persists. Researchers believe this uneasy balance exists because the finches once played a role in cleaning parasites. Even now, their feeding may remove ticks and lice before it crosses the line into bloodletting. To drive them away entirely might mean losing that service, so the boobies endure, even if the bargain has grown darker. What strikes observers most is the calmness of the scene. There's no frantic chase, no violent struggle. The finch hops lightly. The boobie shifts its wings. The blood flows, and both continue as if nothing is unusual. It is a portrait of survival, stripped of drama, an act both shocking and strangely ordinary in the rhythm of island life. This ordinariness is what unsettles us. Predators like hawks or sharks are easy to understand. They kill, they eat, they move on. But a songbird feeding on blood breaks the pattern. It feels unnatural, like a contradiction. And yet, in the Galápagos, contradiction is the rule. Evolution thrives in the space between what seems impossible and what simply works. The vampire finch reminds us that survival has no script. It is not bound by categories of herbivore or carnivore, of harmless or dangerous. It follows opportunity, seizes chance, and writes its own rules in the moment of need. That is why the bird is both disturbing and extraordinary. It embodies nature's ability to twist, bend, and reinvent itself without hesitation. To understand why the vampire finch matters, we must look at the environment that created it. The Galápagos Islands are born of volcanoes, their soil thin, their climate harsh. Rain may vanish for months, leaving the land parched and lifeless. In such conditions, survival is not about thriving. It is about endurance. Every creature here has been shaped by scarcity. Tortoises grow massive to store water and energy. Marine iguanas dive into the sea to graze on algae, braving the cold currents. Cormorants surrendered flight to become powerful swimmers. Each story is strange, each adaptation unexpected. And among them, the finches tell perhaps the most intimate tale, how a beak, simple and unassuming, can unlock survival strategies that change the very identity of a species. For most finches, seeds are enough. A sharp beak cracks open shells. A pointed one probes cactus flowers. A sturdy one crushes insects. But for the vampire finch, seeds are not enough when the island falls silent under drought. Its sharp little beak finds another resource, one flowing warm and red beneath the skin of its neighbors. What began as grooming became bloodletting, and bloodletting became survival. This is not the work of one generation. It is the slow, relentless hand of natural selection. Birds that discovered the trick endured when others starved. Their offspring carried the habit forward, each drought etching the behavior deeper into instinct. Today, the vampire finch does not choose to drink blood. It is compelled by evolution, driven by the inheritance of survival. And so the islands whisper a lesson that feels both strange and familiar. Necessity reshapes life. Hunger redraws the boundaries of behavior. In the silence of scarcity, survival becomes invention. An invention, no matter how unsettling, becomes the new normal. The vampire finch's feeding habit is a striking example of how fragile trust can be in the animal world. What begins as a cooperative act, parasite removal, quietly shifts into exploitation. The finch takes more than it gives, and the boobie tolerates it until the balance tips. This gray zone between help and harm is where evolution often works best. It is messy, it is uncomfortable, but it is effective. Some scientists argue that the boobies have simply been outmaneuvered, their instincts slow to adapt to the finch's persistence. Others suggest the relationship is not entirely one-sided, that even with blood loss, the birds still benefit from reduced parasite loads. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a compromise of necessity where neither side wins fully, but both survive enough to continue. Watching the scene unfold, you realize how much survival depends not on strength, but on strategy. The finch is not powerful, it cannot fight or intimidate, yet it thrives by finding a niche that no other bird dares to take. In a world of scarcity, creativity is the sharpest weapon. There's something haunting about this arrangement. A creature we associate with innocence, tiny, brown, unremarkable, becomes a symbol of hunger's ability to rewrite the rules, and the larger seabird, majestic with its wings and plumage, becomes the unwilling donor in a story of survival that looks more like myth than biology. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line between cooperation and cruelty is thin, and in the wild, it can vanish altogether. What we see as betrayal is, for the finch, nothing more than adaptation. What we call vampirism is, for the island's, balance. When scientists first captured footage of the vampire finch feeding, the world reacted with disbelief. A tiny bird, sipping blood from the back of a seabird, seemed like something invented for folklore, not science. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The cameras showed the finches hopping onto boobies, their sharp beaks breaking skin, their throats moving as they swallowed the crimson drops. What was once rumor became reality, and reality was stranger than fiction. For evolutionary biologists, the discovery was more than shocking. It was illuminating. It showed how quickly behavior could shift under pressure. In the Galápagos, droughts are not rare. They are regular and devastating. In such times, food sources vanish, and creatures must improvise. The vampire finch proved that even the most harmless-seeming animal could cross into darker territory if survival demanded it. The adaptation is not just about blood. It is about resilience. The finches are opportunists, feeding on seeds and insects when available, but falling back on blood when the land offers nothing else. This flexibility is what ensures their survival. They are not bound by a single niche. They are bound by whatever works. Still, the imagery of a blood-drinking songbird grips our imagination in ways that seed-cracking never could. There is something visceral in it, something that echoes our own myths of vampires and predators cloaked in innocence. It makes the finch larger than life, a symbol of survival stripped of sentiment. And yet, if you stood on the cliffs of Wolf Island watching the sun sink into the Pacific, you might not even notice them. They are small, quiet, blending into the rocks. Only when you see the white plumage of a boobie streaked with red do you realize you are witnessing one of nature's strangest bargains. To the untrained eye, the vampire finch is almost invisible among the flocks of Darwin's finches. Its feathers are a muted brown, its size unremarkable, its song a soft chirp like any other. But survival is rarely written in appearances. It is written in behavior, in choices made when hunger bites hardest. And the vampire finch carries within it a choice so unusual that it reshaped the way scientists think about adaptation. Field researchers often describe the moment they first see the feeding ritual. A cluster of boobies stands in the heat, their blue feet pressed into the rock, their eyes half closed in the glare of the sun. Then small shadows hop among them, finches darting here and there, heads tilted in watchful curiosity. One bird climbs higher, pausing on a wing or shoulder. It pecks gently, almost like a caretaker. The booby tolerates it, even leans into it. But then, slowly, the pecks draw blood. The finch lowers its head and drinks. There's no drama. The host remains still. The finch feeds until satisfied, then flutters off to join its kin. The wound glistens red, a tiny mark left on white feathers. And then the cycle continues, another finch, another sip, another uneasy balance. For the people who witness this, it is a moment of awe mixed with unease. We are used to predators stalking prey, to hunters chasing victims. But this is different. This is intimacy turned inside out. Grooming becomes exploitation. Trust becomes opportunity. And survival becomes written in red. In that moment, the Galapagos feels less like a paradise of evolution and more like a theater of extremes. Every creature here tells a story of transformation, but the vampire finch tells one that feels almost symbolic. It is not just about food. It is about the fragility of boundaries, the way cooperation can tip into cruelty without warning, the way life refuses to obey our expectations. What makes the vampire finch so captivating is that it is not alone in nature's catalog of blood drinkers. Bats in Central and South America lap blood from livestock. Leeches and lampreys cling to hosts in rivers and seas. Even insects like mosquitoes have evolved to pierce skin and sip life from beneath. But the finch is different. It is a bird, a creature we expect to feed on seeds or nectar, not to cross into the realm of parasites. That contradiction is what makes it feel so strange. For biologists, this behavior is a reminder that blood is a resource like any other. It is rich in protein, iron, and water, exactly what an animal needs in the leanest of times. The vampire finch did not invent vampirism, but it discovered it in a place where few options remained. And once the discovery worked, evolution sealed it into instinct. Genetic studies suggest that Darwin's finches diverged from a common ancestor only a few million years ago. That means the blood-drinking habit is relatively recent, born from the pressures of these small islands. It is not an ancient tradition. It is a new solution to an old problem. What do you do when the land gives you nothing? What fascinates researchers even more is how quickly young finches learn the behavior. They watch adults, they imitate, and soon they too are pecking at the feathers of boobies. In this way, culture and instinct blur. The act is passed not just through genes, but through observation, reinforced by droughts that make blood the difference between life and death. And when you look closely, you see that the vampire finch is not just a curiosity. It is a case study in how survival drives creativity. Nature is full of edges, and on those edges, the rules bend. A bird becomes a vampire. A parasite becomes a partner. And an island becomes the stage for a story that feels both alien and inevitable. The boobies themselves are central characters in this drama. With their striking blue feet and sleek white plumage, they stand in stark contrast to the small earth-colored finches that hop around them. The boobies are hunters of the sea, plunging like arrows into the ocean to catch fish. On land, they rest in colonies, their bodies exposed and still. It is here, in this moment of stillness, that the vampire finches find their chance. From a distance, the scene almost looks peaceful. A colony of boobies preening in the sunlight, finches weaving among them like attendants. But look closer, and the truth is revealed. Feathers darkened with streaks of red, small beaks probing open wounds, drops of blood glistening in the heat. It is not violence in the way we imagine it. It is quiet, measured, accepted by both sides as part of life on the islands. Researchers have long debated why the boobies tolerate the feeding. Some believe their instincts are simply too slow to recognize the harm. Others suggest the energy lost from resisting would outweigh the small cost of blood. Still others think that the legacy of parasite cleaning makes them reluctant to drive away the finches entirely. Whatever the reason, the relationship continues. a balance of tolerance and exploitation. For the finches, the benefits are clear. Blood provides not only nutrition, but also hydration. In times of drought, when streams dry and seeds vanish, the liquid warmth of blood keeps them alive. It is grotesque to our eyes, yet perfectly efficient in the logic of survival. And it is in that efficiency that the islands whisper their lesson. Beauty, cruelty, cooperation, these are human words. For the finches, there is only one rule: endure. The first time Charles Darwin set foot on the Galapagos in 1835, he could never have imagined that among the descendants of the finches he studied, one would turn to blood. His notebooks were filled with sketches of beaks, notes on diets, observations of seeds and insects. The idea that a finch might one day hop onto the back of a boobie and drink its blood would have sounded like fantasy. And yet, it is the same story he uncovered. Adaptation, driven by hunger, sculpted by necessity. For the vampire finch, the story begins with opportunity. Grooming was the gateway. By picking off parasites, the finches established trust with the boobies. The hosts tolerated their presence, even welcomed them. That trust was the opening that evolution needed. A few pecks deeper, and a new resource was discovered. Once the blood was tasted, the behavior spread, reinforced by every drought that tested the island's fragile balance. Scientists studying the finches today see more than just vampirism. They see a lesson in how fragile the boundary is between cooperation and exploitation. A single step, a small shift in behavior, and the roles change. The helper becomes the parasite. The friend becomes the thief. And nature, indifferent to our categories, simply nods in approval, because survival is all that matters. What makes the vampire finch extraordinary is not its size or its strength, but its creativity. When the land closed its doors, the bird found another way. It turned a relationship into a resource, a host into a lifeline. And in doing so, it carved out a niche that no other bird occupies. To us, the image is unsettling, but to the finch, it is simply life. In every drop of blood, it carries the proof that survival is not about following rules. It is about breaking them, bending them, rewriting them until they fit the harsh rhythm of the world. The vampire finch is more than a curiosity. It is a mirror. It reflects back to us the uncomfortable truth that survival is rarely clean, rarely beautiful, rarely kind. Life does what it must, and in the Galapagos, what it must sometimes looks like betrayal. A tiny bird, innocent in form, becomes a drinker of blood. A host, trusting and patient, becomes a source of life for another. And yet, when we strip away our judgments, what we see is not cruelty, it is invention. A lineage of small birds, trapped on barren islands, found a way to endure where others would have vanished. They turned desperation into strategy, necessity into instinct, and in doing so, secured their place in the wildest chapter of evolution. Perhaps that is why the vampire finch fascinates us so deeply. It blurs the line between the ordinary and the monstrous, between cooperation and exploitation, between the world we expect and the world that simply is. It shows us that even the most familiar creatures can carry secrets stranger than our myths. So the next time you picture a bird, imagine not just the gentle song in the trees or the graceful arc of wings against the sky. Imagine the finch of Wolfe and Darwin Islands hopping boldly onto the back of a seabird, drinking blood drop by drop in the silent heat of the Galapagos sun. It is a reminder that evolution does not paint with soft strokes. It carves, it tests, it pushes, and sometimes it writes a story so strange that it feels like legend. The vampire finch is one of those legends, alive and real, proof that survival has no limits, and that the most shocking instincts are often the truest reflections of life's power to endure. And so, in the rocky silence of Wolfe and Darwin Islands, the vampire finch continues its strange ritual, small, unassuming, yet carrying within it one of nature's most unsettling strategies. A bird that learned to drink blood, not from malice, not from cruelty, but from the relentless need to survive. It leaves us with questions that echo far beyond the cliffs of the Galapagos. How thin is the line between cooperation and exploitation? How quickly can trust turn into opportunity? And what does this say about the world we live in, where survival, whether in birds or in people, often demands choices we never expect? The vampire finch does not offer answers. It offers a reminder. Life is not bound by the stories we tell. It is stranger, harsher, and more inventive than we imagine. And sometimes, the smallest creatures carry the biggest truths. If this story has fascinated you, if you want to keep uncovering the wildest secrets of evolution and the strangest instincts of the animal world, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow explorers, and subscribe to Bizarre Animal Instincts. Ring the bell so you never miss our next dive into the unbelievable. And remember, in nature, the unbelievable is always true. Until next time, stay curious, stay amazed, and keep listening to the whispers of the wild.